Buttermilk. Who has that sitting in the fridge on a regular basis to be used at one's disposal? Unless you drink or use it daily, you don't. How many times have you bought buttermilk for a recipe? You used 1 cup and then 2 or more weeks later, you find the remaining unused, spoiled portion still in the carton in the back of the fridge. Time to pour it down the kitchen sink. Such a waste. Welcome to Summer Bakes the World. This channel bakes breads and dishes from all over the world, sharing lots of history and tips. Recently, I made a traditional 4-ingredient Irish soda bread. See the suggested video and recipe linked in the description below. But as I was perusing the recipe, I noticed buttermilk was an essential ingredient. Now, don't get me wrong. With so few ingredients, I don't think buttermilk should have been substituted in this recipe unless you really had to. However, I was reminded of the number of times over the years I have subbed buttermilk in all sorts of recipes. It occurred to me, why not make a video on the many ways you can sub store-bought buttermilk for alternatives you likely already have in your kitchen? While you can buy buttermilk or buttermilk powder, see the pic, and just mix it with your recipe's dry ingredients before adding the liquid. Why bother with these when there are so many great substitutes for using buttermilk in baking and cooking? Not only that, but call me crazy, but you can also use the following substitutes for regular milk in cooking and baking. In fact, I have used many times my Greek yogurt and water version to make my weekly bread and bechamel sauce. Ridiculous sounding, I know, but it works as long as you don't mind a little tang in your sauce. When you're in a pinch though, you do whatever you can. In my world, there's always a way. What is buttermilk really? Buttermilk is basically just soured milk. It is used as a leavening agent in baking. The acid in buttermilk causes a reaction when mixed with baking soda or baking powder. If recipes call for buttermilk and either baking soda or baking powder, that means a reaction will happen. Thus, buttermilk is needed to produce a light and tender bake. Since a reaction is needed in the bake, you should not substitute with just regular milk because without acid, we will not have the necessary reaction. The question to ask yourself is this: how can you artificially sour milk to get that same type of reaction as buttermilk? The simplest answer is this: just add 1 tablespoon of a liquid acid, like any acidic fruit juice or any type of vinegar, to every 1 cup of milk. In a recipe, since the acidic portion is so small, you shouldn't taste anything other than a tang. Keep in mind that while you can use any milk of any percentage milk fat from skim to heavy cream, you will be limited to the consistency of the milk itself unless you add sour cream or yogurt to thicken it or water for thinning. For example, if you use skim milk, your buttermilk sub will be thinner than a traditional buttermilk. And if you use heavy cream, your sub will be thicker. So either a cream or water should be added to reach the desired consistency. Here are 5 simple buttermilk subs with acceptable modifications, and I give you a whole lot more options near the end. Substitute number 1 is going to be milk of any kind and lemon juice. All right, so you can use 2%. I'm going to be using whole milk today because it's going to be more of that buttermilk consistency. And then you could also use any milk substitute. I have almond milk here that I just made recently, but we're going to focus on whole milk today. But you could use any of these and you would still get that buttermilk flavoring. Since the goal is to sour milk in an even bigger pinch, if you don't have any lemons, try limes or oranges, even those little mandarins, those little cuties or halos you can get at the grocery store. For this sub, all you need is a lemon. I always have lemon concentrate in my refrigerator just in case. You could always use this too. Again, the acid that we put in the milk is so minor that you're not going to notice it in a bake, okay? So you could use this if you wanted to. I'd like to go fresh today, so we're going to use this because I have a lemon. And whenever you cut a lemon, if you're going to cut it for your tea or whatever, the best way to do it is to always loosen up those juices and sit it out of the fridge for a bit and let it come to room temperature for about 30 minutes or so, and it makes it so much easier to manipulate those juices inside of the lemon. So once you rub it out, you're gonna cut it in half. So for this sub, all you need to do is add, for a full cup of milk, of buttermilk, you would add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice into a measuring cup and then fill it up to equal 1 cup of milk and let it sit for 5 minutes to activate. So for purposes of demonstration here, I'm only going to use 1/2 of a tablespoon of my lemon juice, because I'm only going to fill my measuring cup up to 1/2 of a cup, because we're not using this in a recipe. Now, so I'm gonna end up baking bread later, and so I'll use it for that. But we're just going to do 1/2 a cup. So that was 1/2 of a tablespoon of lemon juice, and we're gonna add enough milk to equal 1/2 of a cup. Again, pouring on a flat surface to make sure I get that full 1/2 cup and I don't actually add too much or too little because I don't have it set right. So now I'm just gonna whisk this together. Make sure that that lemon juice gets dispersed with the milk. Okay, and then I'm gonna pour it into this little glass here so I can use my measuring cup again. This is our artificial #1 flavoring buttermilk here. We're just gonna set this aside for 5 minutes to allow it for thickening. Substitute #2, milk of any kind and vinegar. Again, since the goal is to sour milk in an even bigger pinch, if you don't have white vinegar, try any vinegar you have, like apple cider vinegar. Because there's so little acid, you should not be able to taste the extra flavors in your bake if you go with even apple cider vinegar. I've heard people say that they can't taste it. So in a pinch, you could always do that. All you have to do for this one is just like the lemon juice. You add 1 tablespoon of vinegar to a measuring cup, pour in enough milk to equal 1 cup. For testing purposes today, we're gonna do 1/2 of a tablespoon, so we're just having the recipe of vinegar in our 1 cup measuring cup. And then I'm gonna add just enough milk to equal that 1/2 cup mark. We wanna whisk it up so that the vinegar disperses with the milk evenly. Give it a good whisk. I can smell that vinegar. All right, and then I'm just gonna pour it into a little cup here to compare later. Okay, so we're just going to set this one aside now and let it start to thicken. So this is the vinegar. All right, substitute #3, milk of any kind and cream of tartar. That's right. For this one, all you need is 1 3/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar for every 1 cup of milk, okay, or milk substitute. So because we are using half the recipe, we're going to use 7/8 of this cream of tartar. So I actually have 1/8 of a teaspoon, but if you use maybe just a little bit less than a teaspoon, you'd probably be okay. So I'm gonna put in, that's 1, 2, 7. Okay, that's 7/8 of a teaspoon of cream of tartar. Now I'm gonna make a little paste out of this. So I just wanna add a little bit of milk first. Okay, then I wanna whisk it up because I don't wanna have clumps of powder in my buttermilk. Okay, that looks mixed pretty well. And now I'm gonna add enough to equal 1/2 cup, just like we did with the other two. I can do this without spilling it. All right, that looks good. Okay, and now I'm gonna whisk it up a little more. And then I have another little condiment cup here. So I'm gonna pour this mixture, and we're gonna do the same as we did with the vinegar and the lemon juice. We're just gonna set this aside for 5 minutes to allow time for everything to kind of thicken up. While that one sits to thicken, let's move on to sub #4. If you don't have a liquid or powdered acid, then why not a soured cream mixed with milk or even water? So I'm gonna use sour cream for sub #4. Did you know that in professional restaurant kitchens, chefs will simply sub true buttermilk for a mixture of 1 part sour cream to 1 part milk? Here's what that looks like. Now you can use any milk that you want. Again, I'm using whole milk. That's what I have. I also have 2% almond milk, but I want to use my whole milk because to me it resembles more of the buttermilk. I use water a lot in place of milk here. So you could simply go with water too. But for testing purposes, we're gonna go with the whole milk. So you're gonna need 1/4 of a cup. So usually it's 1 part sour cream with 1 part milk. So I'm doing 1/2 a cup of liquid here. I'm going to spray my 1/4 cup here with cooking spray so that my sour cream easily comes out of it. So I'm just going to put in 1/4 of a cup of sour cream. It doesn't say low fat or full fat, so it's probably in between. All right, so of course the cooking spray helps to release most of the cream out of that. That's 1/4 cup. So I'm gonna add 1/4 cup of milk. I'm gonna pour it until it reaches that 1/2 cup mark. And then I'm just gonna whisk it. So this is mixed pretty well. So I'm gonna sit this aside because I have 1 more to make, but this is ready to go. You don't have to let this sit. In fact, I'm gonna pour it in this and let you see what it looks like. That's sour cream with milk. As I said before, I have used water in place of milk many times, and it really does work. You still get the dairy and the sour combination. You just need to thin it out to the consistency of buttermilk or milk. That's all you need if you're going to use the water. If dairy is an issue for you, just use vegan sour cream instead. Here's what the sour cream and the milk look like. We're going to set it aside for now while we continue with the other. Now we're ready for substitute number 5, which is Greek yogurt and milk. That's it. For this one, I've used both full-fat Greek yogurt and I've used non-fat, and it's the same. You can choose either or. The full-fat's going to be richer than the non-fat, but just think of it like a buttermilk versus a low-fat buttermilk. It's going to be pretty much the same. So guess what with this one? More often than not, I mix 1 part plain yogurt. I've done non-fat and full-fat with water instead of milk. Make sure your yogurt is unflavored, by the way. You still get that dairy and sour combination. You just need to thin it out to the consistency of buttermilk. So for this purposes, I'm gonna use the full fat today, but non-fat works just the same. So just like we did before, I'm gonna spray my measuring cup. I'm gonna do half a recipe, so instead of a full cup of milk here, we're gonna do half a cup. So I just need 1 part yogurt. Notice how easily that came out using my spray. With 1 part milk. So this is 1/4 cup of yogurt with 1/4 cup of milk, and that's gonna equal to 1/2 cup. And we're gonna whisk this to mix it up really well. So if you choose to use water in place of milk for either the sour cream or this one, the mixture will not be quite as sour, heavy, or strong, but it does serve the same purposes, and it's great in cooking and baking. So it doesn't really matter much since it's only one of many ingredients in a recipe. It's mixed well, it's already prepared and ready for our recipe. So I'm just gonna pour it in my little cup here, and let's do some comparisons. All of the buttermilk substitutions we've made are here, including real buttermilk. So I'm using a low-fat buttermilk as my comparison here because that's what you mostly find in the stores. So if we look at traditional buttermilk, this is a low fat. Okay, notice how it coats the spoon. There's some bubbles on it because I shook it before I took it out. Let's take a look at the pouring consistency. It just looks like a thick milk, right? Let's go to the beginning over here. The first one we did, this is the lemon juice. The lemon juice has actually colored the milk just a little bit of a tan color. It looks like a thick milk. The milk is coating the back of the spoon, so it looks pretty much like the consistency of the low-fat buttermilk. And that's just lemon juice and milk. Remember, that is whole milk, but any milk would work. Okay, this is our vinegar. Interestingly enough, this one doesn't feel quite as thick, even though there's the same amount of milk in it as the lemon juice. But because it is a whole milk, you definitely get the coating of the spoon. It just feels a little thinner to me. This is the cream of tartar. This one, to me, seems more like the vinegar. It's definitely a little thinner. Consistency of whole milk. If you were to use skim milk, you'd have the consistency of skim milk here. Now you could add, in addition to these, you could add a little bit of sour cream or yogurt to thicken it up if you wanted a thicker milk. All right, so this is the sour cream. Now this looks like the consistency of the buttermilk, and it coats the back of the spoon as well. And then let's look at the yogurt. I did use the full fat yogurt here. To me, this is all the same. I feel like I'm seeing the same things over and over from one cup to the next. You've got the coating on the back of the spoon. I looked at several grocery stores in my town and I could only find low-fat buttermilk. So I think this is likely the norm these days in any grocery store. So my recipes here are for the consistency of low-fat buttermilk. If you look online, you'll find recipes that say to use 3/4 cup of sour cream with 1/4 cup of milk, which might be more of an appropriate ratio for full-fat buttermilk, but I don't have that to my disposal. So I can't compare this to regular buttermilk. So my recipe is comparable to the low-fat buttermilk, which is commonly found in the stores. So I think the bottom line here is to use ratios that yield the consistency that you're looking for. Start with less cream and add more liquid until you have what you need. If you are vegan or unable to consume dairy, substitute any non-dairy plant-based milk alternative like nut, seed, oat, coconut, or tofu beverage for the milk. In place of sour cream and yogurt, just use vegan sour cream. Let's give this a taste. I'm gonna compare everything to my low-fat buttermilk. So I'm gonna take a little bit of a sample of that. It's very thick. I'm gonna go down to the lemon juice here. It is thick, creamy, and very sour. So most of you know what buttermilk tastes like. All right, let's compare it to the lemon. Not as sour, but definitely has that sour buttermilk flavoring that you're looking for a buttermilk replacement. Honestly, the lemon is so slight, it's not very strong at all. You could really drink that and I don't think you'd notice much of a difference. It doesn't have the thickness of buttermilk, I don't think. If you were to use heavy cream, you might get closer to the thickness of a regular buttermilk. Vinegar, I think this one's a little bit fainter than the lemon juice when it comes to sourness. Let's try the cream of tartar. Huh, interesting. I've not done cream of tartar before with milk. It does give the sourness that you're looking for. It's not very strong, but it is still there and it exists. It's enough acid that you need to fulfill that light, tender loaf of bread that you're looking for if you're baking with a substitute. Okay, this is a sour cream. I like this one. I think it tastes good. It's still not as sour as buttermilk, but it definitely fulfills that sourness that you're looking for. Okay, this is a yogurt. I don't think the yogurt is as sour as a sour cream, but I would tell you honestly, for preferences of actually like just tasting it, I think I prefer the lemon juice. I think I would say lemon juice, sour cream, yogurt, and then probably, I know it's a toss up between the vinegar and the cream of tartar. But if I want buttermilk, I'm always gonna go for the traditional real buttermilk, but all of these substitutes will take care of your buttermilk needs. I don't see a problem in actually drinking any of these. So if you're craving buttermilk and you really want a little bit to drink, or if you're having that cornbread and you want some buttermilk to go with it, I don't know. I don't think it's a bad idea to use an alternative, but you're still gonna be better off using the real thing if you have it. But if not, there are lots of options. Ultimately, buttermilk is a key ingredient and necessary if called for in a recipe. Thus, it should never be eliminated since it is a leavening agent. However, in baking, you really don't need to buy true buttermilk when there are so many great alternatives. I've used the sour cream and yogurt versions many times in making sandwich bread, biscuits, pancakes, and waffles. I've even used it as a sub for milk and boxed mac and cheese, believe it or not, and homemade dairy sauces many times. The tang is a little noticeable, but it's not overpowering. Trust me, if you're in a pinch and you really need that milk ingredient, you won't even notice the little tang. Having said all of this, if you're making a recipe where buttermilk is the star or main ingredient, particularly if the word buttermilk is in the title, I would use real buttermilk. But honestly though, how often are you really going to make something where buttermilk is the star? So given that, no need to buy it except on special occasions. And even then, to avoid spoiling your buttermilk in the fridge, just bake some bread. I use buttermilk, like all this, I'm gonna be using to make my weekly bread when this is all over. So make several loaves of bread, slice them, freeze them, take them out whenever you need them. There's no wasting of our buttermilk. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and share my videos with your family and friends. Your support is much appreciated. And until next time, go bake the world.